Hello everybody, welcome back to the James Lawrence Allcott channel. Yes, that's right, I'm wearing the same jumper. The reason I'm doing that is for consistency. For consistency of the video, because when I did a transfer that every single club needs, which is a video that's out right now if you want to go and check that out, a couple of things happened. One, I started talking for too long, and I actually started talking about a player that should leave every single team as well. So what I've done is I've put that into two separate videos. So go check out the one transfer that every Premier League club needs when you get a chance. But this one is going to be a video where we're talking about one player that should be sold by every Premier League club in this window. The second problem that we had in the last video is I got a bit confused at the end of it, and West Ham and Wolves, I spoke about the player that should leave those clubs and didn't say the player that should be signed. So with that in mind, at the end of this video with West Ham, you'll see, and Wolves, you'll see the players that should be signed for them. So really, the bottom line of all of this is watch both of the videos and you'll find out everything you need to know. The one player that needs to go, the one player that needs to come in. Last bit of admin, of course, is to do two things for me, guys. If you're enjoying this kind of content, get involved in the comments below. I'll be chatting back to you. Hit the like button and subscribe to the James Lawrence Allcott channel. Let's get into it. Right, let's kick off with Arsenal and a player to sell. Now, this one, I'm going to kick off with something that's not really going to be too controversial. Mesut Ozil is the player that needs to make way, and for all parties involved, this seems like a smart thing to do. I think they need to put their swords down now and get to a point where they go, look, we understand you want to run down your contract, sure, but also, look, you're not going to play, you're not going to be a part of it, so maybe it's time where you take any kind of dent in that wages from an Arsenal's perspective, from Mesut Ozil's perspective. Go and play football again, mate. Go and play football again, because we all want to see you playing football, and it's not happening, and it's a short career. So get out there, get yourself a club, stop messing about. Let's move on from this. Next up, it's Aston Villa, who've had a very good start to the season. I think they can be really pleased with the recruitment that they've made, and I think that they're on the cusp of kind of really getting away from the sort of money-laden, get yourself back in the Premier League, and now establish themselves as a Premier League side. And with the players that they've brought in so far, the likes of Ross Barkley, you could see being a permanent deal down the line. Ollie Watkins has been great. They've been able to retain Grealish. It's been absolutely huge for them. So in terms of players leaving, there are two options here. Now I'm going to go to Football Manager for this one, for a few of these, just to highlight the situation with these clubs, because their contracts are important. Because when the contract is in its final year, you're not going to get that much money for them, but then you have a look at the wages of some of these players, and it might be an option still to try and get them off the books and get them a new club in January. So you have two options really in terms of selling players. I think the likes of Ahmed El Mohammadi has been brilliant. He's actually been a good solid player for them despite the high wages that he's on. Conor Hourihane in that same kind of vein. Same goes for Henry Lansbury. Players that are probably on their way out of the club, aren't really good enough for the Premier League. Maybe Conor Hourihane is, and at 29, maybe you can get him a club and maybe get a few pennies for him, but you're not going to get too many. So for me, there's two options here. You've got the wages and you can get rid of one of those guys. But actually, if you want to make a little bit of money out of this, I wonder if Bjorn Engels is the guy to go for Aston Villa. Because I think at 25, a little bit younger, you can get a bit of resale value off on him. And in terms of the centre-backs for Aston Villa, they've been really, really good, haven't they? So I think Bjorn Engels, who's not a bad player, it's just kind of it's not worked out for him totally. He might be the guy who you let go and look to bring in someone new and make yourself a little bit of money when it comes to Aston Villa in this January transfer window. Right, next up, Brighton and Hove Albion, the player that they need to get rid of. Don't need to get rid of, but they don't need him there anymore, in my opinion. And actually, I think you can make some money, is Alireza Jahanbakhsh. Hopefully I've said that correctly. I think, look, you can get a bit of money for him at the moment because he's actually in a situation where he's still got 2 years left on his contract. And with that, and the fact that you got McAllister in front of him, who I think is ahead of him in the pecking order, Leandro Trossard as well ahead of him in terms of a creative midfielder who gets that kind of freedom. He's had little moments, hasn't he, over his career at Brighton, but overly hasn't really proved anything. And at the age of 26, he's now kind of in his prime. You've also got a few years on his contract. So it might be one where if you can get a good offer from a team, then you might as well take it. Let's talk about Chelsea. Chelsea, who needs to go? A big hitter of a player that needs to maybe be moved on and is in a contract where you can get some money back again, which is, I know, a recurring theme in this video. But Marcus Alonso is not the first choice left back and is never going to be the first choice left back for Chelsea ever again. Sounds harsh, but it's true, because Chilwell's there. they spent a lot of money on Chilwell, but the fact is that Alonso's still got 2 years on his contract. So if you can let him go and let Emerson be the backup, then that seems like a smart move for me. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer. Should be able to get a bit of cash for him. Maybe it is a little bit too late for him in terms of this stage of his career. Let's see how old he is. 29 years of age. So it's now or never with Marcos Alonso, I think, in terms of making some money off the back of him. And the fact is he's not going to start, and he's also had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Chelsea fans over the years as well. So for all of those reasons, Marcos Alonso is the player that Chelsea need to sell. Right, Crystal Palace. Let's talk Crystal Palace. I cannot wait to show you this. I mean, if you're a Crystal Palace fan, you're probably a little bit nervous about this, but also it could be the next stage of what Crystal Palace is looking to become. And actually, Roy Hodgson, who doesn't get enough credit, has slowly kind of moved this club along, right? And they're now playing a lot more exciting football. But let's have a look at the situation with the contracts at the moment, because look at the expiry date of a lot of these players, big players in the club, players that play games, right? Van Aanholt, let me just highlight them. Van Aanholt down to Jaroslav Jack, right? And there's a lot of first team players that will be going on a free if they don't sign a new contract between now and the end of the season. So in terms of players leaving, like the ones that I would say, I would move to Max Meyer, because Max Meyer has just not got the opportunities there, and Eze's come in and just jumped right in front of him. He's a better player. He offers more in terms of what Hodgson wants his team to do, and therefore to create stuff for people like Zaha. So Max Meyer, in terms of someone who's supposedly on 125k a week, is probably the kind of player that you need to get rid of, and they probably have been trying to get rid of in the summer as well. So it might be one where you just cut your losses with something like that, especially when he's in the last 6 months of his contract. Elsewhere, you just need to re-sign a lot of these players if you want to keep a hold of them. But again, look at the average age of a lot of these players: 29, 33, 33, 32, 34, 33. It's crazy. On to Burnley, and look, they've got such a thin squad that actually, in terms of selling any of their players, it's not really something we want to probably do. In terms of the players and their contracts running down, you've got a few players that are running down. You could say someone like Phil Barsley might be the kind of player to go, but at 35, really you're not going to make any money from him. I wonder for a team like Burnley that does need to sell some of these players, as well as bringing in players that can maybe on a free or maybe on the cheap that you can get a couple of years from. Matej Vidra will be the player that I would say can go from Burnley, because I don't think he's ever going to be a starter for Burnley. I think he's been there long enough to sort of have that period of time where he could have proved himself, and he's never really done it. And also, he's never going to be the first choice, because I think generally going to go with Ashley Barnes and Chris Wood. So for me, I think Matej Vidra at 28 years of age, his contract runs out in 2022, so you've got this period of time to let him go. And there might be a championship team that wants to throw a little bit of money, or there might be another Premier League team that might want to kind of throw a bit of money at someone who has scored goals, albeit in the championship. I don't think Burnley would do that, but maybe in the championship they would cut their losses a little bit and take some money for him. Who needs to leave Everton Football Club? They are slowly getting there in terms of moving out the players from that nightmare season a couple of seasons ago. There's two really obvious ones for me with this one. If you can offload them in any way, shape or form, I would get it done. I think the first one is Yannick Bolasie. He's had a real nightmare, to be fair to him, and I'm sure that's not of his own doing. The thing with the injuries for any player is, of course, they're never trying to be injured, but it's not worked. He's on 75k a week. He's the kind of player that you would want to let go, but I think he's absolutely certain that he knows he's not going to be able to get that kind of money elsewhere. So he's probably going to run down his contract, which does finish at the end of this season. So if you can get him out on loan, then great. But again, I would be surprised who's really going to be interested in him at this stage of his career until he is a free agent. The other one, in terms of maybe making a bit of money from, is Fabian Delph. I think he's got another year after this year. He is a little bit older, so you're going to struggle to get too much money for him. But I think his consistent problems with injuries as well is a bit of a burden. You hope he's going to hit the ground running, but you've seen him get injured again, so it might be one way you want to cut your losses with him. Next up, Fulham, who deserve a bit of credit. They really do, because actually a lot of the players that they brought in, they've got a side that actually I quite like watching now, which I shouldn't say as a QPR fan. But the likes of Lookman's doing bits, Loftus-Cheek's getting involved as well, Cordoba Reed as well. A lot of interesting, exciting players there that want to feel comfortable on the ball, technically proficient, good footballers, right? And Fulham are giving themselves a real chance now. But with these players coming in and doing well, you're now getting to a point where you look at Mitrovic and you think he just doesn't fit it anymore. He doesn't totally fit it. And he is a player that will be worth a lot to a lot of Premier League teams. So Mitrovic is the player that I'm going to say, yeah, maybe let him go. Because I think the way that Fulham are looking to play now, they have enough players to sort of keep the ball and move up the pitch. And you've also got someone like Ruben Loftus-Cheek who can kind of be that target man, be that sort of backboard. Also, that's probably doing a disservice because he can turn and be in the half spaces as well. But he can do a lot of that work. I think they're sort of bombing in those crosses. It's just a little bit too obvious. And that might work in the Championship, but in the Premier League, they've clearly had a problem with it. So they need more energy and they need to be a team that works well in transition. And that's actually what Scotty Parker's putting in place there. So with Mitrovic maybe leaving, you're going to have to get someone involved. So that player, for me, is someone who's a bit of a hybrid. Leeds United, the obvious one here, Kiko Casilla. He's been replaced, hasn't he, by Meslier. Meslier has been really good, actually, overall for Leeds this season. Obviously a youngster as well, so he's got years in the tank. And I just don't think you need him. Obviously, there was a bit of chaos with him last season, and so maybe it's just time to kind of cut your losses there and go get some cash for him. I think Islam Slimani is the one. It's never really worked, and he's not a bad player. 32 years of age now, and in the final few months of his career at Leicester City, you're maybe not going to get much money for him. There's another one, maybe someone like Demarai Gray, who's had a bit of stop-start. He's 24 years of age, and again, he's coming to the end of his contract, so you might have to sell him on the cheap if you can't get him to sign a new deal. But I think Islam Somali, with the £80,000 per week wages, yeah, I think it's time that he left the club. And you might be able to get some kind of money, or at least recoup those wages that you would spend between now and the end of the season. Let's talk Manchester United. And I think I'm going to do a video probably at some point looking at the whole situation with the contracts. But if we look at them just briefly here, you do have a good set of players that are in the final year of their contract. And a lot of those you're not really going to get any money from. That's generally the case when players go into that final year. And out of those lot, I think there's one or two that really do need to go. Marcus Rojo and Jesse Lingard both need a new start, a new challenge. And Jesse Lingard at 27, the youngest of the bulk of them, Joel Pereira, the other one. But Jesse Lingard maybe just needs that new chance for him to kind of redeem his career and breathe life into it. So Jesse Lingard's going to be the player that I would say would be the person that you need to go. If you want to go and get some money for it, which I don't think is the big concern for someone like Man United at this point in time, it's Eric Bailly maybe, because I think centre-back is the area, right? For Manchester City, they've got quite a tight run ship there. I mean, tight run. I mean, the fact that it's tight run is because they got so much bloody cash. But when you look at the contract situation, the players that are in their final year, Aguero, look, that is a problem. You want to make sure that he's signed up. Because I think even at the age of 32, I think you still get a couple of years for him, and I think he'll be okay being the backup as time goes on. Scott Carson, you've got to get him on another contract. Fernandinho, 35 as well. Eric Garcia, I think we know where we're at with that. It looks like he wants to move on. So then in terms of making some money, because, you know, as much money as Manchester City have, it is still a business. So you've got a few players that are reaching 29, 28, and so the resale value isn't really there, and they're still probably integral parts of the squad, and you're not going to get too much money for them. I'm talking about the likes of Riyad Mahrez, Ilkay Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne. Of course, you're never going to sell him, but he's 29 years of age now. Then there becomes a couple of players that are around the 23, 24 mark, both 23 actually when I'm looking at it. Gabriel Jesus and Alexander Zinchenko. I'm going to go with Zinchenko as the players that you might as well sell, because I think he's not really got a future there. He's been playing out of position quite a lot for Pep Guardiola. They thought that you could find a way for him to play as almost maybe this inverted fullback, and actually it ended up Kyle Walker was doing that job a lot of the time, and Zinchenko was playing as a proper left winger. But here on Football Manager, it's suggesting that he's actually an attacking midfielder, right? So he's not probably happy with the position that he's playing in. I don't think Guardiola thinks he's either good enough for that or good enough to play in the position that he wants to play, which is going to be a position that Ferran Torres is going to have for the next 4 or 5 years at the very least, right? So Zinchenko, 23 years of age, he's contracted to 2024. I think he's the obvious shout in terms of a player that you could make some good money for. But if they are trying to finance the deal for Lionel Messi, I think there is a call and a decision that needs to be made on Gabriel Jesus, because at 23, he's still not taken over the mantle from a 32-year-old Sergio Aguero. Now, Sergio Aguero is wonderful. I get it. but there are still these question marks on Gabriel Jesus. Yes, the level is very high, and yes, he's actually a very good, useful component in those Champions League games. I think we saw that in the Real Madrid ties, that he can do such a job for the team. But I think we're still kind of waiting for him to really kick onto the next gear and be the main number 9 for Manchester City. So there could be a call there that you might want Jesus to go. But at this stage, with him contracted to 2023, you've got time with him where you can still, get a lot of money for him. And actually, Zinchenko is the one that needs to go. I'm looking and I'm struggling here. The one player that I wonder if you could get a bit of cash for is maybe Dwight Gale. Dwight Gale is that kind of player that he's too good for the Championship. And is he Premier League? I'm not sure. They're not going to renew his contract, I would have thought. So you might be able to get some money, not just from some Premier League teams that might want him, especially with Newcastle United doing quite well at this moment in time in the season. Of course, they're not over the line yet, but if they are able to get there, then they might give him to a Premier League rival. The smarter decision would be to offload him to a Championship team fighting for the playoffs or looking to get themselves into the Premier League. Maybe a team like Norwich might want to go for someone like Dwight Gale, just because, they haven't got that many options as strikers at the moment. They've only really got Pookie up there, Adam Adar as well. So maybe Dwight Gale is a good player that a Championship team will go and buy. But otherwise, I think he's struggling to make any money at Newcastle. Sheffield United, now they are in a bit of a predicament here. And as a club, they need to understand, where are they heading? Most likely, it's into the Championship. And if they are moving into the Championship, then they want to get as much money as they can from these players right now, or they want to fight to the end. It's difficult because I think if we look at the wages, like obviously the wage bill of a lot of players is always important. I'm sure there are relegation wage decreases that happen, but someone like George Baldock at the age of 27, when you've got someone like Jayden Bogle who's come in at the start of this season, and I like him. I like him as a player, and I think he's one that could grow. He's got a lot of years to kind of get better and better, and has played a lot of games for Derby before that. And if you go back into the Championship, he's a really good right back for you. George Baldock at the age of 27, he would probably want to go, but with it being 2024 in terms of his contract, you can still get a good chunk of money from him. Who's going to want him? That's a good question, because I think generally there are so many great right backs in the Premier League at the moment. But I do think if you are kind of offering him out to clubs, then you might be able to get some money from George Baldock. After that, it then comes down to players that are in the last year of their contract. John Lundstrom hasn't played too much this season. Hasn't been as on fire as he has in the previous year. Normally when a player's in their final year, you actually see, you see that chutzpah from them and they go on and have a cracking season. Let me know in the comments below that player who in the final year of their contract just caught fire because he was obviously either after a new contract or after a new club. But it hasn't really happened for John Lundstrom. But at the age of 26, you might still be able to get some money for him. The other one for me was Lys Mousset as well. 3's enough for you, but I think, look, in a dream scenario, in a way that doesn't completely affect your chances of staying in the league, there's actually quite a few options if you want to make some money if you're Sheffield United right now. But again, the people will circle for Baldock, especially at the age that he's at. But the contract negotiations, you might want to be careful and not just take the first offer you can get when you've actually got that position of strength when it comes to George Baldock. So maybe someone like Lys Mousset, who's actually still 24 years of age, he's on 25 grand a year, but he hasn't really been starting for you. That could be another one as well for them in terms of players that they could sell in the January transfer window. He's got a year and a half left on his contract, so you might be able to get some money out of this one. It's Michael Obafemi. It's just not really developed the way that we were kind of hoping. We were all hoping. I think people know that he is a bit of a live wire and has scored some cracking goals, but it's just not being consistent enough. And it feels like Southampton have just kind of moved beyond him, and he's sort of stood still a little bit. So maybe someone that you can get some money out of. Maybe put a buyback clause in as well to bring him back if he does go away and do have a great season or two, right? So I think Michael Obafemi is probably the one player that I would say he can make way, and you can maybe make some money off him in January. In terms of players that are leaving, I'm not even going to talk about it for too long because I think it's pretty obvious. Danny Rose needs to go. I've always really liked Danny Rose, and I don't think he's a bad player, but a lot of Spurs fans just aren't fans of him anymore, so he does need to move. Maybe AC Milan. aside from Danny Rose, if you look at the contract situation at the moment, they're actually in quite a strong position, Tottenham Hotspur. And there's one name that leapt out there for me. A lot of people are talking about Dele Alli. I actually think you're going to need him. If you want to try and win the Premier League this year, there's going to be games where you're going to need someone like that in the sort of centre of the park, obviously further up the field. And you might need to manoeuvre around the fact that Son has got injured or Harry Kane's got injured. And someone like Dele Alli could be of real use in that sense. The player that I think, he's contracted to 2022. Eric Lamela. Eric Lamela is always he's been steady, he's been okay, he's up for playing in the Europa League, he's keen, but he's never really been good enough. And the fact that he's still got a year after this year on his contract, he's the kind of player that you might go, look, we now want to try and get as much money as we can from a player that is probably quite clear that we're not going to be able to, get him to become a starter for Tottenham Hotspur. He's 28 years of age. He's on 80 grand a week. I just think there's a move there to be made where all parties can be happy, because I think Lamela would probably, in the primary years, wants to play as much as possible. Spurs would probably be okay with selling him, and I think you could get some good money as well. Be a good option for him. In terms of a player that can go, you've got Charlie Austin, who's just not really getting the minutes anymore. So I think for everyone, it's good that he goes. But I'm going to go with Grosicki. He wanted to go in the summer. He's in the last year of his contract, and he's probably quite an appetising player for another team bid in the Championship, or maybe even in the Premier League as well, if you want someone with sort of legs and the stamina that he's got. So Grosicki would be the one that you might be able to get a few pennies for. Antonio has made that striker's role his. And Sebastian Haller, 36 million they brought him in for. It might be a case where you pass him on now and take the money that you can. Can you get 50 million for someone like Haller now, where he is still kind of scoring a few goals and has that kind of potential? Or do you wait a year and then all of a sudden he's Christian Benteke and you're struggling to offload him? I wonder if you go and do that. Let Antonio be the star man now for West Ham and bring in a player who can give him some competition, but it could maybe grow in and allow West Ham to play the exact same way. And that player for me is Boulaye Dia, 24 years old, playing for Reims at the moment, and he's on fire. He really is on fire. I haven't seen a huge amount of him, I'll be honest. I've seen some of his highlights, and I like the way that he plays. It's quite similar to Antonio, maybe a little bit slighter than Antonio, maybe the same sort of maybe same burst of pace as Antonio, but he's like Antonio light, let's say that. But at 24, he is, he's right up there in Ligue 1 in the goal scoring charts for Reims. It's not for PSG or Monaco. He's right up there. 8 goals so far this season in 10 games. It's fantastic. And in terms of having that energy up top, I don't think Haller offers that to the same degree. And in terms of having that target man for set pieces, I think Souček is actually more likely to be that. So you're better off going and get someone like Dia right now on the cheap, and then if he does well, great. If he doesn't, you've still got a few years in him left and you haven't spent too much cash on him. And certainly learning from the bad mistakes that they've made over the years, West Ham, and they are now starting to get right with the likes of Jarrod Bowen, or then giving Antonio a chance, Soufal, Souček, like those players that don't cost an arm and a leg. I mean, Bowen cost a lot, but they have the hunger. Haller, it just has never felt right, has it? And his demeanour has never really felt right either. And so I think if you can go and get money for him and bring in someone like Boulaye Dia, then I think you're onto a winner, personally. They need to replace Raul Jimenez. And Raul Jimenez, just to put it in perspective, his XG this season is 2.36, but he's actually scored 4 goals, which just highlights that he really does take the chances that come his way. So you need someone who can be quite clinical. I think you need someone who's ready to go, right? And Fabio Silva, I think there's a lot of potential seen in him, but it's probably a little bit soon for him, and he's a different kind of player. So Luka Jovic at Real Madrid, completely out of favour. Obviously was fantastic at Eintracht Frankfurt, and that's what got him that move to Real Madrid, but he's never really going to get the proper chance at Real Madrid. It's not going to work out for him. You'd need a super agent to get involved, and maybe there's someone at Wolves that could offer that kind of expertise to get themselves to Luka Jovic. But there's an amazing project there at Wolves, and so these kind of players, he would just be the next brick in that. And then all of a sudden, if you've got Raul Jimenez and Luka Jovic up top, then you're looking pretty scary again. I think he could be a good option both on loan or if you want to buy him outright. Last but not least, Liverpool. Now, For me, it's Shaqiri and Origi, but I've got to pick one, haven't I? So if I'm picking one, I think it's got to be Origi, because I think there's quite a few clubs that would like to have a look at him. I've got this kind of like Batshuayi vibe with him, where he's kind of like, he's been at, been at this big club, but never really been the proper number 9 for them, because he's probably not actually good enough. So he would do well for a mid-table Premier League side, quite possibly. I think a few teams would want to get their hands on him as well. I just think with Jota coming in, there's just not really space for him anymore, and he's not really ever going to play anymore. And the fact that Mohamed Salah is happy to play in the middle, Mane can do that as well. I just don't see any space for Origi anymore. So maybe it's time to say thank you and say goodbye. In terms of the player that you bring in for Liverpool, I think it has to be a centre-back, doesn't it? So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. One player that needs to leave every single Premier League club, apart from West Ham and Wolves. Like I said at the start of the video, if you want to find out the player that needs to leave those 2 clubs, and then one player that needs to sign for every Premier League club, then go and check out the other video part of this 2-part collaboration. It looked like I was milking a cow there, didn't it? If you like this video, hit that like button. I really appreciate it. If we get to 1,000 likes, that would be wonderful. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell as well. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's. I will see you guys very, very soon.